Today we'll cover the list of celebrities, those who went from riches to rags. Filing for bankruptcy carries a heavy stigma, but when individuals can't settle their liabilities, it can be the only option. Disastrous risk-taking, dodgy dealing, runaway spending, a hefty tax bill, or just plain bad luck can propel a person into financial hell. And the richer they are, the harder they fall. Veronica Lake. The 1940s screen siren Veronica Lake, who was famed for her femme fatale roles in movies like This Gun for Hire and The Blue Dahlia, not to mention her much-imitated wavy hairstyle, had a serious alcohol addiction that contributed to her decline as a star. Lake declared bankruptcy in 1951 at the end of her film career. The tragic actress had debts of $156,574 against assets of $168,050, and her home was seized by the Internal Revenue Service due to unpaid taxes. In today's money, those debts would total $1.9 million. Lake had a stint as a cocktail waitress in the early 1960s, but returned to acting in 1963, appearing on stage and in several TV shows. She died aged 50 from an alcohol-related illness. Aaron Carter, $3 million in debt. The younger brother of Backstreet Boy Nick Carter, Aaron Carter, pictured with his mother in 2001, followed his sibling into show business and made more than $200 million by the time he turned 18, a staggering sum of money that should have set him up for life. There was just one catch. Carter failed to meet his tax obligations and owed the Internal Revenue Service millions. The former child star claimed his parents failed to manage his money correctly. In 2013, at the age of 26, Carter filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy with assets of just $8,232 and debts of $2.2 million, $3 million in today's money, much of which was owed to the U.S. tax authorities. Following his bankruptcy, Carter was working hard to pay his dues, releasing music and performing in as many shows as possible, but was arrested in 2017 for driving under the influence and marijuana possession. Tragically, he died in November 2022, aged just 34. Mark Twain, $3.6 million in debt. Great American writer Mark Twain, whose real name was Samuel Clemens, made a good amount of money from writing. However, he lost a fortune investing in newfangled technologies, most notably the page typesetting machine. Twain plowed $300,000 into the gadget during the 1880s and early 1890s, but was left massively out of pocket when the linotype rendered it obsolete. In 1894, the father of American literature declared himself bankrupt in a New York state court. His debts amounted to $100,000, around $2.9 million in today's money. Fortunately, Twain recovered financially with the help of Gilded Age industrialist Henry Huddleston Rogers and paid back his creditors in full despite being under no obligation to do so. Henry John Heinz, $4.5 million in debt. Founder of the world-famous food giant that bears his name, Henry John Heinz was compelled to declare bankruptcy in 1875 when his condiment business, Heinz Noble and Company, went into administration following the Panic of 1873. The failure was chiefly due to poor sales of the company's horseradish relish, which was based on his mother's age-old recipe. Grappling with debts of $160,000, the equivalent of $4.5 million today, against assets of $110,000, Heinz narrowly escaped jail and even struggled to afford to eat for a time. Luckily, the plucky businessman founded F&J Heinz the following year. Not long after, he launched the firm's famous tomato ketchup, and the rest is history. Boris Becker, at least $5 million in debt. From the tennis court to the UK's High Court, Boris Becker was once estimated to be worth over $131 million. However, he was declared bankrupt in 2017 in London, with debts believed to total around $5 million today, owed to the private bank Arbuthnot Latham. According to the German press, the six-time Grand Slam champion may have owed his many creditors as much as $67 million. Becker's financial nightmare began in 2001 when he was ordered to pay a divorce settlement to his ex-wife Barbara and paternity payments to model Angela Ermakova, which totaled $20 million at the time, and it's all been pretty much downhill from there. In a bizarre twist to the saga, the tennis legend tried to claim diplomatic immunity from bankruptcy in 2018 based on his role as attaché for the Central African Republic, but later dropped the claim. In 2019, Becker was charged with hiding assets including a property in Chelsea, London, and $1.7 million in cash. Then, in October 2020, Becker was charged for not disclosing his trophies and medals to bankruptcy trustees, as well as sending payments to individuals, although the former tennis star denied this. He was found guilty and served 8 months in an English jail. Mickey Rooney, $5.1 million in debt. Mickey Rooney, $5.1 million in debt. At the peak of his career, actor and comedian Mickey Rooney had a personal fortune of around $12 million. Yet by the early 1960s, the man Vanity Fair described as the original Hollywood train wreck had burned through the lion's share. He filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1962, revealing that he had nothing left of the $12 million he had earned over the years. At the time, he's said to have had just $500 in cash and almost $500,000 in debts, the equivalent of $5.1 million in today's money. In addition to costly alcohol and drug addictions, Rooney was a compulsive gambler, and his finances were mismanaged to boot. The star never regained his fortune, and in 2011 he alleged elder abuse and financial exploitation by members of his family during a Senate Special Committee hearing. The Hollywood icon died in 2014 at the age of 95, leaving an estate valued at just $18,000 and owing medical bills and back taxes. Karen Millen, $9.8 million in debt. Fashion entrepreneur Karen Millen co-founded her eponymous company in 1981 with just $124 and opened her first store in England in 1983. The British chain expanded throughout the 1980s and 1990s, and by the early 2000s, Karen Millen boasted 130 stores worldwide. In 2004, the business was acquired by Icelandic Mosaic Fashions, and Millen cashed in to the tune of $45.6 million. Despite the windfall, Millen ended up in deep financial trouble. The former fashion boss claims she was defrauded by Kaupthing, the failed Icelandic bank that financed the acquisition of her company, and that she was roped into a sketchy tax avoidance scheme, both of which cost her dear. In 2016, Millen was declared bankrupt by the UK's Inland Revenue after failing to pay a £6 million tax bill, the equivalent of $9.8 million in 2024. Dionne Warwick, $14.3 million in debt. The second most charted female artist of all time in the U.S., after the late Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick scored 69 singles in the Billboard Hot 100 over her long career. In spite of her incredible chart success, the 6-time Grammy Award-winning artist had no choice but to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 2013, citing $10.7 million in debts. That's the equivalent of $14.3 million today. Warwick claimed her finances were grossly mismanaged over a number of years, and that those in charge failed to settle bills of just under $7 million owed to the U.S. tax authorities. The That's What Friends Are For singer sued the Internal Revenue Service over the matter. Burt Reynolds, $19.9 million in debt. When actor Burt Reynolds died in 2018, he had a respectable net worth of $5 million. But the Smokey and the Bandit and Boogie Nights star had plenty of financial headaches to deal with during his life, and after his costly divorce from Lonnie Anderson in 1993, Reynolds' finances took a turn for the worse. A failed restaurant venture and a propensity for overspending, Reynolds reportedly shelled out $100,000 on toupees to hide his bald patch, for example, didn't do him any favors either. The actor, who dominated the box office in the 1970s and 1980s, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1996 with debts of $10 million. That's the equivalent of $19.9 million today. William Durant, $20.5 million in debt. The co-founder of General Motors, William Durant was hit especially hard by the Wall Street crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression. This resulted in the collapse of Durant Motors, the firm he established in 1921 after he was pushed out of General Motors. The company went out of business in 1933. Durant was also a major stock market player during the 1920s, which magnified his losses following the Wall Street crash. The automobile pioneer was declared bankrupt in 1936 with debts of $914,000, the equivalent of $20.5 million today, while his only assets were $250 worth of clothing. Durant and his wife Catherine were saved from penury by a General Motors pension, and he died solvent in 1947.